Hello everyone, it is April from Getting Cocoa With It. Today I want to talk to you about some of my most hated characters that I have read in books. I cannot stand these characters and I want to share them with you. So let's get into it. There are certain characters that I read and they impact me because they mean a lot to me. I look up to them. And then there are characters that I read about and I'm filled with rage. I'm filled with rage and disdain. And today we're gonna just vent about some very crappy characters. So let's dive into the books. The first character that I really hated was Ada's mom in The War That Saved My Life. In this book, we follow a little girl named Ada and her younger brother named Jamie. I forgot his name for a second there. They live in London with their mother, and Jamie is allowed to go outside and play and go to school, but Ada is stuck inside because she has a twisted foot. Her mother is so embarrassed by her twisted foot that she doesn't allow her to go outside ever, and she's stuck indoors and she's so verbally abusive. It is disgusting. And to trap someone inside and not allow them to go outside and have friends, not go to school, it's classic abuse. Ada and Jamie eventually do leave their little home in London because it's World War II and the bombs are dropping. And so, like all kids, well, many kids in London at this time were sent to the countryside in the hopes that it would save their lives and you know, free them from the bombings. Now Jamie is sent, but Ada has to essentially run away and get on the trains that will bring her to the countryside. She has to save herself because her mother is so horrendous. I hated her mom so much and I cared so much about Ada. Luckily, Ada and Jamie end up staying with a woman in the countryside who takes them in, slightly reluctantly at first, but she shows them so much love and she shows them how worthy they are of love. And you see Ada blossom on the countryside. There is a sequel to this book that I haven't read yet, and I'd really like to read that soon. So that's The War That Saved My Life. It's very good. P.S. It's middle grade. I forgot to mention that. Another parent that I despised so much is the father in The Color Purple. This is written by Alice Walker, and we follow Celie and also Nettie, and their father is the one who takes care of them. He, at the very beginning of the book, he is incredibly abusive. He repeatedly rapes Celie. She has children by him, and he's just a horrible and despicable human being. And he starts to have eyes for Nettie, and they are able to escape. Unfortunately, they are separated, and we follow Celie as she gets married to also not a great human being at all. He's also abusive. And then Nettie leaves, and she ends up actually going to Africa. And we follow her storyline later. But the father that they are able to run away from at some point, finally, they're able to get out of his clutches, was truly horrendous. And I had so much hate for him. He was just a nasty human being and should not have been taking care of two girls. So yeah, that's The Color Purple. That said, this book is amazing and about female friendships and female love and sisterhood, and I loved the women in this book so much. Next is The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. This follows a group of women who decide to help Eleanor Roosevelt's dreams of having a widespread library system. So in the rural South, I believe this takes place in Kentucky. In the rural South, a lot of people were not able to read, and so the idea was that these traveling libraries would go around and help people to learn how to read, and also just help with literacy in general. And so we follow a group of women. In particular, we follow two women. One of them is Alice. And they go and by horseback and bring people books. Now, Alice has moved to Kentucky from England, I think. She marries this man very much in a rush to escape her home in England. And it's slightly too rushed because she marries a man who doesn't have any backbone when it comes to his father. And her father-in-law is so rude and misogynistic and just a horrible, horrible man that like has his son under his thumb. And I can tell you right now, I would not do well under these circumstances. And Alice doesn't do well. She's berated by him constantly and put in her place constantly, and her husband does nothing. So I kind of hate her husband as well, but I mostly hated her father-in-law. Oh my goodness, he was just awful. Next up is Queenie. So I adore this book so much. This follows Queenie, a Black woman living in London. She has just been broken up with, but this ex-boyfriend of hers has said we're on a break, so she doesn't think they're fully over. And she spends her time in this book dealing with some rather horrible men and having sexual relationships with multiple men who are not kind to her, who can be racist, who can be physically slightly terrifying. And over time, she does grow and starts to learn and develop self-respect for herself. She is surrounded by this group of women that she calls the corgis because she's Queenie and Queenie has corgis. Anyway, and those women are really great, and I really enjoyed looking at their friendships. But I really hated her ex-boyfriend because he strung her along so much, and it does flash backwards in time to situations that she's remembering about her ex-boyfriend, and he was really awful to her. He didn't stick up for her. In fact, he would like belittle her and tell her she was over exaggerating when she would go to like family parties of his and there would be racist comments, and she would stick up for herself in those moments. And he would be like, you're ruining this birthday party. And he was just a crappy boyfriend. And I mean, I hope that you've never had a crappy boyfriend like this, but I've had crappy boyfriends in the past. And, you know, it is nice to see her develop herself to the point where you feel like she can be with someone and understand that she is worth more than these crappy guys, and she can kick them to the side, kick them to the curb as they are rightfully deserve. So it is really wonderful to see Queenie, and I adored her so much. She felt so real to me. But I still hate her ex-boyfriend. I hate him. Moving on to another horrendous human being. But in this case, he lives and exists in the world. This is Educated by Tara Westover. This book is about Tara Westover's childhood and teenagehood as well. So her younger years living in, where in the heck did they live? Oh, it doesn't say where they lived. They lived in the countryside, kind of on the outskirts And her parents didn't believe in the education system. They didn't believe in the healthcare system. And so they kept her back from getting an education. And there were many scenarios in here where, you know, modern medicine was absolutely necessary. Like a car crash would happen and they would wait for days sometimes before they would bring someone who was concussed to the hospital. Her father was abusive, very verbally abusive, and her mother really didn't stick up for her and her family. But the person in here that I really genuinely despised was one of Tara's brothers. He was physically abusive to her in a jarring kind of way. I've never, before reading this, really considered sibling abuse, and I don't know why, because of course that could happen. But there are so many scenes in here where he is physically abusing her, and she doesn't fully understand. She knows that he's doing something wrong, but she also makes a lot of excuses for him. She just loves him so much and wants his respect, and he will not give it to her, and he manipulates her and hurts her, and he is a horrible person. Luckily, she did have other family members and other brothers who were very, very good to her. And luckily, she was able to escape this situation, and she ended up becoming like highly, highly educated. I think she went to Cambridge and Harvard. Like, she did well for herself. But with that, she still had so much trauma as a child because of her father, but I think it's clear that mostly because of her brother. So I really hated him, and I think he was my most hated character in literature, even though this is nonfiction. One of my most hated characters that I'd ever read until Jacob Strain. So my Dark Vanessa follows a young girl who goes to a boarding school, and she doesn't really have a lot of friends. She ends up having an English class with a professor who dotes on her and tells her that she's very intelligent and not like the others. And slowly but surely he starts to sexually abuse her. Now, at the time, she doesn't recognize it as sexual abuse because he's being very kind to her. He is essentially grooming her. And she doesn't see it until many years later. Even, this flashes back and forwards in time. Even many, many years later, she's a grown adult. She has a full-time job, and she even then doesn't recognize it as abuse. Even then, she thinks of it as this love affair that she had with her high school English teacher. And it takes a very long time for her to realize that this was abuse. And that is the sad state of affairs when it comes to a lot of victims. It can be very difficult to see someone who is kind to you and to recognize that as manipulation, and to recognize the telltale signs of grooming. And many survivors of sexual abuse want to impress their abuser so much, and there's so many people just don't understand in our society how grooming works, and there's a lot of victim blaming because they went back to the person and they befriended, they were still trying to be friends with the abuser, and they don't understand the sheer level of manipulation that happens in sexual abuse. And this illustrates that really well. It is very hard to read. It was so hard for me to read. I had to put this down several times because I was so seething with anger to Jacob Strain, her English teacher. And I just wanted Vanessa to recognize it. I wanted her to see it. And also, you know, she really struggles with her mother and her mother's handling of it. That was also really hard to read. So I struggled reading this book, but I think it's one of the most important books I've ever read. That said, I despise Jacob Strain. I hate him. He is my most hated character. So those are all of the characters that I have read that I really cannot stand. Let me know in the comments below. Do you have a book in mind where you have a character in that book that you think is like the scum of the earth? I would love to know who that is. These books can be really hard to read, but they're obviously and honestly some of my favorite books. So I'd love to know your most hated character. Before I go, I should mention that in the description box below, you can check me out on Goodreads, Instagram, my Amazon wishlist is there. You can head on over to my Patreon page. Yeah, I hope that you guys are doing really well, and I will talk with you soon. Bye, guys.